Hello, and welcome to the weekend episode of Views of an Outsider. Back to Basics, Part 4. What is a parent? For 3 weeks now, we have asked some pretty basic questions. But as a society, it seems to me like we have circled back around to the beginning, and people have forgotten the answers to many of the foundational questions in life. So be it. That's okay. We can start with the ABCs if that's where we are. There is nothing wrong with the ABCs. They are important. It is helpful in life to have learned them. So the goal behind asking these questions is to help people clear away the fog from their own minds and to get everybody up and running at their full potential. And there is nothing shameful about starting at the beginning. That may be best anyway if we're going to build something solid this time. 3 weeks ago, we started out by asking the notorious question, what is a woman? There is a wide range of individual human variation within that category, but the answer is not entirely limitless. Otherwise, it would also be entirely meaningless. If everything is a woman, then nothing is a woman. It just becomes another useless, empty word that serves no purpose at all and does no one any good. That is exactly where we were on the verge of being not that long ago. But most people have finally made up their minds about which direction to head in, and most of them have chosen reality. The rest of the people out there are slowly coming around too. And that's okay. We all are at different points in our journey, and we all travel at different speeds. We don't have to do things exactly the same way as everybody else does. So, having worked out the details when it came to several of the facets of that infamous question, we moved on to the equally important, but much more frequently overlooked question of, what is a man? That was a question which first required us to rule out what a man is not. And we affirmed the truth once again, that a man is not toxic, defective, useless, superfluous, or a cheap counterfeit of a woman. Having sorted out the two sexes as clearly as we could, we spent last week looking at what those two sexes bring to each other, and what is the purpose behind having them form into couples. We spent that day asking ourselves, what is a partner? We established that you should probably have an individual answer to that question in mind when it comes to really thinking about what a partner is to you before you start looking for one. And after you've done that, you should probably look where you are most likely to find whatever it is that you want, as opposed to just hoping to get lucky while looking in all of the wrong places that are full of the distractions that keep you from finding what you are actually searching for. This week, we are going to extend our last question all the way out to its ultimate climax and ask, what is a parent? Most of us understand that man plus woman often equals baby, but successfully reproducing is not the same thing as being a parent. And make no mistake about it, a parent is not only a noun or a description of one facet of your identity, it is primarily a verb. To parent is to succeed at doing a job that is unlike any other, and we would all do well to think of it that way and seriously consider whether or not each person is really willing to take on that job before they drag another life into the picture who unfortunately gets to have no say in the situation that has been created if their parents change their minds about doing their job well and to the best of their abilities. For thousands and thousands of years, human beings have voluntarily organized themselves into family groups, and we have continued to do so. Because it works. Families aren't perfect by any means, and our families can often drive us crazy, but we still share a unique bond with them. And you dismiss your own evolutionary need to be part of a family at your own peril. There are many people who hold wide spheres of influence who frequently encourage other people out in today's world to cut their family members out of their lives altogether simply because they hold different opinions, vote differently, don't see eye to eye on politics, or for a variety of other trivial reasons. They encourage the people who are unfortunate enough to listen to their destructive advice to view any difference between their own worldview and someone else's as a deliberate affront that is being made against them, and as a purposeful attack on who they are as a person. And of course, if someone rejects who you are at your core and attacks you, it is reasonable to choose to cut that person out of your life going forward. The problem is that when someone disagrees with you and honestly sees things differently than you do, that isn't the same thing as them saying that they condemn you or reject who you are as a person. And if they continue to have their own viewpoint and way of seeing things because you failed to make a compelling case for your own idea that succeeded in convincing them to change their mind, that isn't the same thing as them attacking you. That is them having autonomy as a separate human being from who you are, rather than simply being an extension of yourself, which might be more convenient for you, I admit, but that is still a pretty narcissistic expectation to have about other people whose humanity matters as much as yours does. Unfortunately for the followers of these online advice givers, who encourage them to constantly blur these lines in their muddied way of thinking, acting on their harmful advice is the surest way for everyone involved to end up alone. There is no one in the world who is going to agree with you about absolutely everything 100% of the time, not even you. The opinions that you held 20 years ago are probably not all exactly the same as the opinions that you hold today. And the opinions that you will hold 20 years from now will probably have changed at least to some degree from the way that you see things right now. That is true of all people. We are creatures who evolve and grow with time. So if that same difference between points of view, when it comes from a friend or family member, means that they should be cut out of your life, then you aren't even allowed to be friends with different versions of yourself, much less with anyone else. Some people might try to argue that maybe that's still okay. Why do we really need anyone else anyway? Maybe we are all better off living mostly or even completely alone. Well, first of all, that is not a very reasonable path to choose if the goal of life is to grow and learn and to evolve into something better, not to mention wiser. The solitary life that is so often celebrated by these modern evangelists is a life of guaranteed stagnation when it comes to both your maturity as a human being and your creativity, as well as the satisfaction that will come from challenging yourself and transforming into someone that is a better and more capable version of the person that you started out being. Secondly, I would ask you to consider how happy and content has a life that is being lived alone and isolated made the people who have actually tried it. Results matter more than theories do. In general, most of the evangelists and the converts who worship the loner lifestyle come across as bitter, resentful, pessimistic, nihilistic, and as people who are usually growing more and more unstable by the day, both mentally and emotionally. There's a reason for that. Human beings weren't designed to thrive alone. Look at what happened to Tom Hanks in Castaway. He ended up arguing with a volleyball, my friends. It was entertaining, but it was also incredibly sad. You felt bad for him. And some people out there today seem to be about one social media post away from doing the exact same thing as Tom Hanks. The very first story in the Bible describes God making the decision that it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. The moral of the story is that one way or another, we all need a little outside help from other people to make it through this life. So, even if the theory of trying to deal with the struggles of life by becoming some Sigma male lone wolf appeals to you and you find the idea of not needing anyone else to be a romantic one, the results out in the real world usually involve going mad and being devoured, which looks significantly less appealing in the realistic light of day than the romantic image does that you may have conjured in your head. Lots of nice-sounding ideas have some very not-so-nice outcomes if they are actually attempted out here in the real world. That's why it's important not to get too attached to our own ideas and to look at their track record when it comes to the results that they have produced before we commit to them too irrevocably. That way we can discard any ideas that we need to whenever we discover that that is what is best for us and the most likely route to increasing our own happiness. It would be wise for each of us to prioritize our quality of life ahead of our ideas. But returning to the concept of families, family units used to consist of much more robust and healthy structures than our modern concept of the nuclear family does. And being a parent today would be a much easier job if these support structures were still intact and available to us. But we tore them all down without assessing their value carefully first, and now we are paying the price. Mom, dad, and kid is the bare bones version of how the family is supposed to function. The nuclear family works, but barely. It is really so much easier with the support of a village. But being a part of a village requires both effort and some sacrifices that will have to be made in exchange for the benefits that you will receive in return. In life, there are no solutions, only trade-offs, as Thomas Sowell correctly asserted. Families used to contain much more than most of them do today, at least in the Western world. Siblings used to maintain their supportive bonds with each other beyond childhood, while also often continuing to annoy each other as well. However, this provided the next generation with aunts and uncles to turn to, as well as the blessing of cousins. This is an especially valuable addition for an only child. That family dynamic is not a very healthy way for a child to grow up, and it doesn't provide a lot of the practical experiences that prove useful later on in life. On the contrary, being an only child tends to teach all of the wrong lessons that will later have to be unlearned, often painfully. But cousins have many of the advantages of having siblings around, without the same frequency of disputes that will inevitably occur in the more inescapable proximity of sibling groups. Grandparents were also an active part of the family unit until recently. They often eventually ended up living with the younger generations of their family at some point. This kind of multi-generational arrangement provided the children in the home with more resources and more family engagement, maximizing their ability to thrive. As issues arose, it also gave the parents the benefit of being able to turn to someone who had more experience for help and advice, as well as supplying an extra pair of eyes and hands to take at least a little bit of the pressure off of mom and dad. And it provided the grandparents with a purpose to their later years that allowed them to keep their dignity as they aged. Rather than feeling old and useless and forgotten, they rightly felt that they still had a valuable contribution to make to the world and to the people in it who mattered the most to them. They found a lasting legacy in the younger generations of their lineage, who were being shaped by them and the adults who would live on in the world after they were gone. That is a far superior setup to being shuffled off into a corner somewhere to age in misery at a nursing home, and then to die out of sight, neglected and alone, with the other lonely people who are in the same boat. Is that how you would want to spend the last years of your own life? Because that is the system that we have built for ourselves, and we will have to live in it one day. We reap what we sow in life. Now, does that mean that I'm going to pretend that the old way of doing things resulted in some sort of idyllic Norman Rockwell painting? Of course not. There were real sacrifices that had to be made in order to have the benefits that were involved, and I know that toes regularly got stepped on as a part of the process. I acknowledge that there were disputes and painful adjustments that often had to be made on all sides, but on the whole, were the sacrifices worth the trade-offs that were made? Judging from the amount of dissatisfaction that most people seem to feel about the lives that they are leading these days, I would have to say that the alternative, on the whole, was a better system than the one that we have created for ourselves from scratch. It turns out that freedom, in the sense of living one's life only for oneself, doesn't really lead to a life where one feels very free. Whereas freedom, in the sense of living one's life, based on balancing the idea of shouldering your appropriate responsibilities in terms of our obligations to one another, from which we derive a sense of value about ourselves, with the pursuit of our own ambitions and dreams, as opposed to our fleeting and meaningless whims, is what ends up making for a life that feels significantly more free than the alternative does. The reality of that statement is a bit of a paradox, I'll admit, but paradox or not, it remains the truth in terms of the results that we find when we look around us. This pattern of paradoxes extends to the idea of having children as well. No one denies that having children is a major sacrifice. Having kids means that life cannot be primarily about you and your wants anymore. Raising them, and especially raising them well, is a very time-consuming, difficult, and oftentimes bewildering, not to mention frustrating, process. We also know that doing this undeniably difficult thing is what most people end up feeling was the most valuable thing that they ever did with their life, as well as the source of their greatest sense of meaning and joy. Children can be annoying, exhausting, infuriating, and even cruel at times. But they can also be wonderful, open, loving, curious, and innocent little creatures that are so rejuvenating to be around that it borders on being magical. We used to be able to understand intrinsically that both of these realities were true at the same time. But only one of these messages has continued to be spread at scale in our current culture. People who don't have children openly resent the people who do, and they complain about them virtually non-stop. They even condemn them for having children in the first place. They paint that choice to bring new life into the world as a selfish one, and cite the environment and the planet or other distant nebulous justifications for their animosity, often while extolling the shallow material benefits of not having children. Irony, as ever, is lost on some people. They deeply dislike any children that they occasionally come into contact with, and they are often irritated by the very thought of having them exist in the world at all. The level of their palpable animosity is both unnatural and irrational. But to be fair, part of the reason that more and more people feel this way is because many parents are utterly failing to parent their kids. They're creating little people who behave in ways that are truly intolerable. Now, some of that is because parents are unwilling to listen to anyone else about effective ways to succeed in their role, because we've all been encouraged to believe that we are naturally superior to everyone else and have nothing to learn from them, that we were born with abilities that require no learning on our part. But other parents are looking for outside help and wisdom. They just have no one to turn to who has actually been there and succeeded at doing this job, who could teach them how to replicate those results more successfully. After all, with a few exceptions, TikTok is not exactly where anyone with any sense goes to get quality parenting advice. And to be honest, a big part of the problem when it comes to failing as a parent is also because many parents accept their own laziness and gratify their desire to indulge their own detached lack of commitment when it comes to participating in their child's life as their parents. They would rather be a friend who occasionally checks in so that they'll have more time on their screens. They just completely abdicate the responsibilities that they agreed to when they chose to bring their child into this world and to become parents. They settle for inflicting their subpar results on the rest of the world, and even worse, on their own child. And they seem to retreat into daring anyone to criticize their lack of effort and the betrayal that their actions entail. Children aren't a self-raising species like goldfish. Like I said, to parent is an action. It is a job. It is an extremely difficult job. One that combines everything that is involved in several other jobs. That is why we need to become a society that values parents who are doing it well and give them the credit that they deserve. There is no such thing as being just a mom. We need to step up and make moms great again. If you don't think that moms are important and you don't believe that what they do has a significant impact on the world, then I dare you to go up to the toughest guy on the street and insult his mother and see what happens to you. Being a good mother is the most prestigious job out there because the hand that rocks the cradle really does rule the world. Deep down, we all know that. So why are we ashamed that it is true? Acknowledging reality doesn't mean that every woman needs to become a mother. But we also shouldn't look down on mothers just because that isn't the path for everybody. Not being a mother isn't right for everybody either. But the problem with the way we view parents as a society goes far beyond an excess of lazy and other unhealthy parenting styles. We are bombarded by messages that children are annoying burdens and only burdens. People simply do not go on social media to talk about the little thing that their child did that brought a smile to their face. They don't take the time to spell out some little thing that would be impossible to even adequately put into words. They're too busy enjoying those things to post about them. But many people do post about their frustrations, their complaints, and their regrets over having had children. Now, being able to vent and get some support and encouragement when you're going through a difficult moment is a good thing. But encouragement is rarely what results from these venting sessions. They become a self-reinforcing cycle where the only thing that we are discussing regarding our children is the negative moments that come along with being a parent. Naturally, we then begin to think about those children in an even more negative framing, and we begin to collectively see only the negative things about having children in the first place. Then we all go back to our kids in that negative frame of mind and find even more things to frustrate us, because that's what we have primed ourselves to look for. And this unhealthy cycle just continues to spiral downward into an ever more pessimistic way of looking at what can be life's greatest blessing of all, The people who are watching all of this from the sidelines understandably see all of the complaining that is going on, and they reasonably conclude that they want nothing to do with such a terrible life. And yet they often find themselves feeling unfulfilled by their own empty alternative. Many of them deal with this by posting videos where they attempt to convince themselves and other people that their lives are wonderful. They talk about the meaningless things that they can afford to buy at Costco because they don't have kids to think about. They describe the places that they get to travel to without making any memories that are worth remembering as the years go by. And they fantasize about all of the opportunities that are still open to them because they don't have children to tie them down, but they rarely or even never end up being excited enough about those possibilities to actually take advantage of doing any of them. And this cycle is self-reinforcing too. In this example, only the positive aspects are discussed and never any of the drawbacks when it comes to the loneliness, emptiness, or meaningless that also tends to result from having made this choice. So, any one individual in the group who feels dissatisfied with their path in life believes that it must just be them. Everyone else seems to be so happy. So they keep their mouths shut out of loyalty to the other people in the group who like to participate in this chosen lifestyle, and all of whom seem to be so fulfilled by it. Meanwhile, the people on the outside only see the glossy veneer of all of the people who all claim to be happy and free, and so they follow their lead, especially when they compare that picture to all of the people who have kids and have nothing but complaints and regrets to offer the world. The parents who worship their kids and wouldn't change the life that they have for the world are everywhere. They do make up the vast majority of parents, but they simply aren't heard from. And can we blame them? They are in love with their kids. It isn't their job to sell that lifestyle to you. They are too busy leading a meaningful life to get caught up in being an evangelist who is trying to convert the rest of us. That isn't their job. They have a more important purpose. But once again, it's about the results. What difference does it make if the picture looks shiny when the results make you miserable? The amount of dissatisfaction with life is way up. Happiness is way down. Suicide and mental illness are both way up. Are we supposed to believe that all of these results are merely a coincidence, and one that is completely disconnected from the choices that we've made? Happiness comes from finding a life that is rooted in profound meaning. Meaning comes from having a purpose, and purpose comes from choosing and embracing voluntary responsibilities. Happiness doesn't come from a shallow life that you dress up and call being free. How can indulging in too much freedom ever be a bad thing? Maybe the answer is when it causes you to forfeit something better than freedom. Or perhaps the difference comes down to what freedom means theoretically, and which things actually produce the sensation of being free. Because many of the things that fall into that latter category often seem counterintuitive on the surface. But what is more important to you? The way that something sounds, or the results that you get? All of these misconceptions and myths out there today when it comes to choosing to be part of a family or not extend all the way down to the root of the family, which is fundamentally a relationship between the two sexes. We have been told that our complete freedom, unburdened by any rules, will result in each of us finding our greatest source of happiness, and nowhere have we been told this more than when it comes to our sexual freedom. Supposedly, the more free we are to do whatever we want to do with whoever we theoretically want to do it with, in each fleeting moment that arises, the happier we will all be. But once again, the results we have simply do not bear that out. People are more free today to be with anyone that they want to be with, as casually as they want to be with them, with absolutely no societal judgment for doing any of it, than they have ever been before, and somehow the result is that people are miserable. They feel terrible about themselves, and they suffer from all sorts of mental and emotional disorders. The birth rates have dropped to well below replacement value, and many people who want to be in relationships are not able to successfully create them. How can that be? If people are more free than ever before to engage in an endless variety of relationships, and they have access to more people to choose from than ever before via the internet and dating apps, as opposed to the limited options that they would have had in previous generations, which were basically limited to the people in their immediate vicinity, then how is it possible that we are failing to achieve the simplest goal of all by being in the successful relationships that most people admittedly want to have? How are we failing to achieve what Neanderthals managed to do in our own supposedly utopian and idyllic environments? Konstantin Kisin made a joke not too long ago about the phrase, "It's like getting pandas to mate." Successfully breeding pandas is notoriously difficult when compared to most other species, yet the average female panda will still have 5 or 6 cubs in her lifetime. The average Western female will have only 1.5 children. We are literally going extinct faster than the pandas are. Why? Shouldn't the people living in utopia be thriving? Doesn't that indicate that maybe our utopia is not really utopia? Maybe what we have is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Isn't it worth at least questioning that possibility? Thomas Sowell was correct once again when he said that much of the social history of the Western world over the past 3 decades has involved replacing what worked with what sounded good. Once again, being theoretically free to do whatever you want with whoever you want in any context in which you choose to consensually engage has produced a sense of feeling trapped rather than feeling free. So you can choose to prioritize life's pretty internet theories, or you can choose to prioritize their results and how they have affected your experience of life. But one of those things has to take priority over the other one. So the question is, are you happy? If not, would you rather be right about a theory on life? Or would you rather be happy? Are you willing to live a life that makes you miserable in order to back an ideology that appears to you, one that you would like to be correct and are therefore willing to remain loyal to no matter how miserable you are? Or does the quality of your own day-to-day life matter more to you than being a good soldier does? We each get to choose for ourselves. And once you've answered those questions, answer this one. Does the quality of your day-to-day life matter to you enough for you to forget about your supposed obligatory loyalty to some cause so that you can choose to live the way that you want to, even if it means going against the grain, and even if that results in your receiving some criticism from the other sheep who are all going in the other direction and unjustifiably expect you to do the same thing as they do? I mean, to be honest, they don't just expect you to do what they are thoughtlessly doing. They get pretty irritated and aggressive when you don't. But you can decide that their dysregulated emotional instability is their issue to deal with. And that is exactly what I would encourage you to do. So, if you want to become a parent, then prepare yourself to do it well. The number one predictor of success for children, especially boys, is to have their father in the home while remaining faithful to that child's mother. So start by choosing well when it comes to the foundation that your family is going to be built on. Choose your partner based on what is important, like we discussed last week, because children learn by example. You can say all of the right things to them, but if you don't walk the walk, then you've wasted your time. If you want to be a good parent who succeeds at raising children who are going to thrive in their own lives, then studies would suggest that the best thing that you can do to make that happen is to focus on having a healthy marriage to your child's mother or father. You want data to back that up? Boys from a broken home are statistically more likely to go to prison than they are to go to college. Those are the harsh facts. Last year, someone made the comment that in the Jim Crow era, families were the norm, including in the black community. During that era, only about 20% of black children were being raised by single mothers, and now about 70% of these children are. There were a few pathetic and mostly unsuccessful attempts to construe this statement as somehow longing for the days of Jim Crow to return. But obviously, having a two-parent household is not an issue that is dependent on also having Jim Crow oppression. Merely referencing the time period as the era of Jim Crow does not mean that the idea that you are advocating for is built upon a return to Jim Crow laws, as any rational person can conclude on their own without my help. The only people who pretend otherwise are hustlers, trying to sell snake oil to the public in the profitable business of divisiveness. But people are getting tired of their unhelpful gimmicks, and fewer people are listening to them every day. The facts are that stats consistently show in irrefutable numbers that children who grow up in homes with both parents do have many advantages over children who do not. They are less likely to get involved in drugs by a significant amount. They are less likely to go to prison or commit crimes by a significant amount. They are less likely to end up as a single parent themselves by a significant amount. Now, that doesn't mean that it never happens. It does. Someone raised in a home with both their mother and their father may indeed grow up to commit crimes one day, or they could become a drug addict. Every stat has its exceptions. Nothing is universally true. Stats are about likelihoods, not certainties. They help us to know what our best bet is. Children raised by only one parent are consistently at a higher risk for the things that I mentioned. Now, once again, it doesn't mean that every child from a single-parent family will grow up to be a criminal or an addict. It means they are at a higher risk for that outcome, statistically speaking. These stats are unpopular in certain circles because some people claim that these pieces of data will make children who grew up with only one parent feel as though they missed out on something. And it will make single mothers feel guilty. But I don't necessarily agree with that idea. Not everyone out there is so irrational that when they hear a statistic that applies to them, it ends up seriously impacting how they think about themselves. If a child grows up with a single mother, but it was a loving and nurturing home that helped them to become the best person that they could be, and then they read a statistic that told them that other children in similar circumstances face disadvantages, I don't see why that would make them suddenly feel bad about missing out on something during their own upbringing. But even if I'm wrong about that, and it is true that these stats make some people feel as though they missed out, they did. And that's sad. Not talking about it doesn't erase the sadness. It's not as though they didn't notice that they had a crappy childhood until someone else pointed it out to them. Do you think they're clueless? We all learn in therapy that these things need to be expressed and dealt with in order to move on. That's the healthy way to handle them. It's detrimental to stuff down old wounds into some dark inner place where we try to ignore them. And it ultimately doesn't work anyway. So why do we approach things that way as a society? Additionally, if a single mother realizes that being a single mother puts her kids at a statistical disadvantage, let's even assume it was through no choice of her own, let's say that she was widowed, then I guess it's possible that this statistic might make her feel bad. But if it also gives her the information that allows her to do everything that she can do to compensate for her situation by bringing in other male role models for her kids, grandfathers or uncles or good friends of the deceased father, then even if the stats do make her feel bad temporarily, which probably indicates that she would have worried about this issue and felt bad about it anyway, if her awareness causes her to compensate for the situation and give her children a better outcome, then wouldn't her temporary sad feelings be worth it? Stats also consistently show us that men in committed, married relationships live longer and are at a significantly lower risk for suicide than divorced men or lifelong bachelors are. Most parents view having their children as the most meaningful, albeit hardest, thing that they did in their life. But what if acknowledging these things might make single people feel bad? Once again, I think in any case where that is true, they probably already feel bad about their circumstances. It's not like they didn't notice that they were single and didn't want to be until you brought it up. So, staying hands-off about these subjects doesn't spare them anything. Secondly, we know from the stats that most of the women who are childless did not plan on or want to be in that situation. And statistically, the majority of those women regret the fact that they never had children. I empathize with them. I'm one of them. I never wanted to be childless. I wanted to be a mother more than anything else in the world. Watching my friends and siblings have the children that I wanted to have but didn't, through no choice of my own, was excruciating. And then watching younger women like cousins and nieces do the same thing as my chance continued to pass me by, rubbed salt in the wound every time, even though I was happy for them. It was painful. Seeing women like drug addicts who didn't want to be mothers, who weren't trying to become mothers, who had no intention of trying to be good mothers to their sweet babies, to see them being blessed with the children that I so desperately wanted, only to turn around and abandon them, was very hard to come to terms with. I don't take the feelings of anyone in that situation lightly. My own feelings on the subject were insurmountable for me for a long time, for decades that were full of agony. And none of that changes the truth about the matter. Yes, there are other ways to contribute to the world and to find a purpose in life. Yes, anyone who doesn't want to be a parent shouldn't become one, for the child's sake as much as for their own. Yes, not everyone has the option to get married and become a parent, even if they want to. And none of that changes the fact that statistically, this is the route by which most people will find meaning and happiness and fulfillment. You don't need to speak for me. by protecting what you think my feelings would be if I heard the facts. We need to stop being so terrified of the truth. It is what it is. It doesn't apply to everyone. That's exactly what the word most means. Otherwise, we would have used the word all. And nothing should be forced on anyone who doesn't want it. But it still remains the truth, regardless of the occasional individual exceptions. To be terrified of and enraged at the truth is a sign of something deeply unhealthy in individuals and in our society as a whole. So gather the information and decide which life you want to build for yourself. And if you want to be a parent, then want it enough to give it your best. Your kid deserves that. Arthur Brooks is a great person to listen to on these kinds of subjects. His advice is both wise and practical. He says, if you want to teach virtue, practice virtue. Be the person that you want your kids to actually turn into. And generally speaking, they will become that person. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please help me to build this podcast into a success by clicking like and follow, because that's what does the trick. And I hope you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.